to the weekly Fireside Chat podcast. Happy to be here with you. I feel a little bad. I didn't drop any information on this site in the last week, and forgive me. I'll tell you a little bit about what I've been up to. Before I do that, I want to give a shout out to Kirsten and actually the entire Experiencer group, which really got its start here on this site. For those of you who've been paying attention, you know this already, but they have moved on. They've actually grown into something really quite significant, and they're starting to get attention, and I'm just so happy and proud. And in fact, I'm going to have a link for that group's YouTube video and their webpage, which is just called theexperiencegroup.com. And there's a really cool YouTube video that they've now got. But here's the thing. So Kirsten, along with Jay from Project Unity, and Stuart Davis, who's very active in this Experiencer group, they, and I believe there might be one other individual, will be on Coast to Coast AM with George Knapp in a couple of weeks. So congratulations, guys. I just had a nice little phone conversation with Kirsten earlier today, and we just chatted about that. I'm just really, really happy. I think the Experiencer group has been doing such important work. There's obviously a great need for people who have had anomalous experiences, who believe that they've had contact in one way or another with alien beings or some other kind of intelligence. What a hard thing to deal with, because that's just the way our society is. And so you've got to have other people to talk to about it. It's very helpful to have a way to get your story out there, just so you can just talk about it, if nothing else, just to have sympathetic ears out there. So I'm just so happy that group has taken off and is doing as well as it is. I'm just really, really pleased. So congratulations, guys. When she might have told me the date that they're scheduled to do that with, I actually don't remember, but when I get it, I'll make a note for it. And those people who are able to catch it live can do that. And maybe we can get a recording of it. You never know. Sometimes that's possible. Earlier this week, another thing I did is I just had someone in our home where he shot me pretty much all day for a documentary that was on things related to secret space program. That was interesting. I think I just sat here in this room and just talked I think nonstop for like 4 hours, just about. So I did that. I'm doing another documentary shoot on Monday, tomorrow, for another group that's coming to Rochester. I'm not doing any travel for this. This is just crazy. They're all coming here just because of the way our society is these days. It's really not easy to expect people to go to you, so they come to where you are. So I'm doing that shoot tomorrow. I'm going to have to review my notes for that, actually. And then the other really big thing, I'm just going to say this now. I don't have any detail yet. I will be able to provide you with detail very soon. But if you recall, last year, we did a very big online event. We're doing another one, and that's going to be in just a little bit more than a month from now. So it will be in late May. I will give you all the details as soon as we can just nail all the elements down. I've got 2 very unique presentations that I will be delivering for this, and there will be other people as well. Some of them are well known to members of this group. One name I think will cause a lot of people to be very surprised, very happily so. But so stay tuned for that. There's a good chance that we'll make an announcement this week. I don't want it to go much longer, because we're going to have at least a good solid month to get some publicity and prepare and all that stuff. But yeah, we're going to do another online event. So, and I'm excited about the things that I will be discussing. Just let me have a couple of days, but until I give you a full fleshed out version of what that will be. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about mostly today is, well, just recently I was thinking again about a UFO-related spectrum of belief. And by the way, I'm going to have text of most of this down below. So I have a text here. There's little doubt in my mind that I'm going to be freestyling for fair portion of this. But yeah, like a spectrum of belief. And this was something that I used to talk about with my former wife, Karen, on many occasions. This is actually a very like engaging conversation that we had. So in other words, we would be discussing how like there's just such a wide range of truths and beliefs that people in the UFO community have, and how you could create a spectrum of belief based on very specific things in the field, from the easiest things to prove or the easiest things to accept to the most difficult things to prove or the most outlandish, maybe, things to prove or accept. And so, at the conservative end of the spectrum, someone might admit, if they believe in UFOs at the most conservative end, they might just say, well, yes, there's probably something that is out there. That it does seem to be hard to explain. But as to what it is, well, we have no idea, and don't jump to conclusions. So that kind of a person is probably not going to be interested in acknowledging that they might not even acknowledge like that these are craft, much less alien craft, right? They also probably would have problems with the idea that people have had encounters with genuine non-human aliens. And they would probably not be willing to accept the claims that there have been retrievals of crash UFOs or that there have been alien abductions or alien encounters. Like that position of belief it's there. There's probably some people who have that belief who are here at this site. That is a legit spectrum of the belief. You can believe in UFOs as simply, we don't know what they are. Pretty much what you hear in the mainstream media these days. They could be anything. I personally do not subscribe to that point of view, and I do not believe that most of the people who say this publicly actually believe a word of what they're saying. But I do think that that's a valid position that someone can take. The ultra-conservative point of view of where you stand on UFOs, if you're going to believe anything. I mean, you could go even farther than that and just be an out-and-out skeptic. Of course, there's lots of those guys. But even within the UFO field, there's just a large range of how people believe. You can go a long way down the spectrum of belief, and you can not only accept the truth of all those things that I just mentioned, but you can go even further. Even 20 years ago, when I was talking about this with Karen, there was always David Icke and his idea of shape-shifting reptilian beings who eat human flesh or drink human blood and secretly rule the world. Like that's to believe that particular scenario, you have to believe in a variety, or you are likely to believe in a variety of other things that lead up to that. And more recently, there have been claims about, the blue avians or portholes or jump rooms or secret plans to save part of humanity when the time comes, natural disaster, alien invasion, blue beam scenario, asteroid impact, spiritual ascension, rising sea levels, et cetera, and on. To say nothing of the more detailed descriptions of types of aliens or claims of telepathic communication with aliens or of the existence of something like the Galactic Federation or anything else on that end of the spectrum. There's an entire array of things that people do believe or can believe. We were talking the other week about Chaim Eshed of Israel and his claim. He just puts it right out there. This man's in his late 80s now. He doesn't give a crap about anything anymore. He's done. He's old. He's like, I'm just going to say it. And what does he say? There's a Galactic Federation. This is a man who ran Israel's space program and was high up in the defense community there. He's a significant person. Now, where he got his information, how he came to believe that there's a Galactic Federation, and that, by the way, President Donald Trump knew all about it in his opinion or his statement. I don't know how he got to where he got to, like what's his evidentiary foundation for believing these things, but it is something that There are a number of people who believe that. So in other words, the spectrum of belief within this field of ours is incredibly broad. And there's never been ever a unified UFO community in terms of belief. It's never happened. And, you know, that was so 50 years ago, that was so 70 years ago, and that is the case today. Between the extremes of each pole, you've got countless gradations, variations, and shades of what people believe, or, and maybe this is even more important, what they are willing to believe. So this notion about the spectrum of belief, it came up in my mind again for a very specific reason. It's because one of the things that I was doing this week, and I'm actually still in, kind of wrapping this one up, is I was reading a book by Barbara Lamb. Barbara. Book is called Alien Experiences, 25 Cases of Close Encounter. And so I've known and admired and really adored Barbara for many years. I mean, honestly, she is the grandmother that everyone wishes they had. Like, she's adorable. She's compassionate. She's super intelligent. And she's very insightful about so many things. Like, you would love to have her in your family. No question about it. Now, I mean, the fact is, I have never fully concurred with her, her tendency, let's call it a general tendency, to view ET contact in mostly positive terms. And I mean, I certainly believe that her insights as a psychotherapist are extremely valuable. In fact, there have been very, very few people who have ever spoken with as much insight as Barbara has regarding the psychological and social costs of being an abductee or being an experiencer. Like, she really gets into it. She talks about this very, very lucidly, and she writes about this with a lot of depth and insight. But one of my quibbles, yes, has always been that there's this tendency, to consistently look for the positive in all of these encounters. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to do. That's just a nice feature of her personality. Look on the bright side of life, right?
As Bitcoin and other cryptos continue to push past,
my phone is on silent mode. Maybe someone can tell me what this is. So I have a Samsung Galaxy here, and it will just start playing the last YouTube video that I have had on. And often, like, YouTube is off on my phone. And I don't know why this happens. If anyone knows what causes this, would you please be so kind as to tell me? I've had this problem with my phone for the past month. It'll just turn on out of the blue. So sorry about that. Nuts. Like, if I'm doing a live stream on YouTube or something, I'll have to airplane that thing or just turn it off, because I can't trust it now. It just will turn on. That was a little thing on cryptocurrency that I must have had on there, which I follow the crypto crowd. All right, back to Barbara. Back to just the spectrum of belief, because that's really where I'm going here. So anyway, yes, she looks at the positive side of contact. That's not always the worst thing to do. Look, I understand I'm not a complete curmudgeon here, and that's fine. But the other thing that I have noticed is, this is my quibble, okay, I admit, a tendency that I've noticed with her to accept a lot of things as evidence that I would not accept as evidence. For example, vivid dreams as definitely valid evidence of abduction. And I'm not saying this in order to argue about abductions or even what constitutes evidence. I'm not even arguing like that you can't view ultra vivid dreams as fair game for investigation. In fact, I think they are fair game for investigation. Like, if you have a vivid dream that seems like an abduction experience, like, yes, you should ask yourself what that might mean. My problem is when many of her clients will talk about vivid dreams, like, she just goes right to it. She says, oh, well, you had another abduction experience. And I just feel like, all right, that's going a little bit too far. I would not unhesitatingly and immediately accept all vivid dreams as essentially equal in value to other forms of evidence. Like if you're trying to figure out if someone had an abduction experience or contact with non-human entities, I just felt like she was very quickly willing to go there and say, oh, yes, absolutely. And then my final quibble, and again, there's a reason I'm going into all of this. And this isn't to trash Barbara. I adore her. And I also believe she does very valuable work. I truly do. Like her book that I'm just about done with here, there's, I can quibble with some of the interpretations, but the data in there is very interesting. And a lot of it is really useful. But anyway, my other quibble came out when I began to analyze the content of the messages that meant that some of her clients, I should say, claim to have been getting from the ETs. So, she'll regress someone and they will say, yes, the ETs told me this and they told me this and they told me this. And I have some issues with that. The stories are interesting, and I have no doubt that these are all good and honest people, but it also became evident to me that many of the messages these people receive from ETs were very much like in line with the ideological belief systems dominant in Southern California's UFO community, which is where Barbara lives. And I mean, the fact is that I'm not from Southern California, and I don't generally identify with a whole lot of at least with all of the ideology of that region. Maybe it was easier for me to notice this. So in short, the ETs, some of them sounded very much like the Southern Californians who were being abducted. So the spectrum of belief definitely was shifted to one end for these individuals. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean. So one abductee said to Barbara that the message she received from the ETs was that, and this is a quote here, "Our planet now exists in 3.5 dimensions, and that the human race is currently undergoing a metamorphosis. They predicted that the planet would suffer many earthquakes, floods, and rampant diseases, causing the loss of life of large numbers of the human race, but many humans would be taken off planet by the extraterrestrials during the chaos." All right, so that's the quote. Now, that's something you hear quite a lot. We've been hearing this for years in the UFO field. But I would mention that this particular statement occurred in 1995, the thing I just read to you. That's a statement from 1995, so more than 25 years ago. So since then, yes, we've had 9/11, now we have COVID. But I think it's fair to say that this prediction did not take place. I mean, 26 years, it's enough time, has not taken place. And like so many others, my take on it is that it's more influenced by the current belief system of the abductee than anything else. Here's one other example. Quote, "The teacher caused her to see pictures in her mind." So the teacher's an ET. "The teacher caused her to see pictures in her mind that he said were from the Earth in the future year of 2010. This was from 1998. "The scenes were dirty brown and orange with crumbled buildings and a rust-colored sky. The being told her that the condition of the Earth would begin to change in 2002 when people would turn on each other in the name of religion and God and annihilate those who rebelled against various religious sects." End quote. Okay, so this seems basically like some version of a real-life Handmaid's Tale combined with the vision in the Matrix in which humans scorched the sky. Remember when Morpheus said that, in their fight against the machines. So some kind of combination of that. To my mind, this strikes me as actually the classic prediction you sometimes hear from non-religious or even anti-religious people who have convinced themselves that religions are the cause of violence and conflict. And it's very much something you hear all the time in contemporary New Age-oriented circles or in groups that are, otherwise identified as progressive. It's an old critique against organized religions. I mean, there's some merit to it. I'm not saying there's no merit to the critique, but it's also, in my view, very, very overly simplified and ultimately not a very helpful critique. I mean, today, yes, there's tension between Islam and the modern world. There's tension between traditional Christianity and traditional Judaism in the modern world. And sometimes Christian nations fight Islamic nations. Yeah, all of that is true. But describing these as fundamentally religious in nature, I think, is totally missing the boat. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were not religious wars. I don't care how anyone wants to say that they may have been, they were not and never were. It was not the point. Anyway, my point here is that regarding this particular prediction, I mean, even though 9/11 did happen a couple of years later, and you could try to stretch things and say that on that basis, the prediction was a little bit accurate, I would disagree. Perhaps certain specific areas of the world might have developed a rust-colored sky temporarily due to warfare. I mean, it's been almost 25 years. There's probably at some point along the way, some sky was rust-colored due to some kind of thing that may have happened. But I think we can probably identify that prediction as a miss. The religious fanaticism that the person discussed clearly did not happen, at least not in the US or in the Western world, which definitely seemed to be what the implication was there. So back to spectrum of belief. It seems to me that each of us comes to this field of study with our own preloaded ideology and belief set. That to me is really important. Each one of us comes to this field with our own preloaded ideology and our own preloaded beliefs. And I'm not here to argue for or against a particular position, at least not here. But what I have noticed is that not only do we all have our own beliefs, but that these beliefs implicitly provide limits or boundaries that tell us implicitly how far we are willing to go in either direction, toward greater belief or greater skepticism. So, for instance, when I look at some of the abduction information, like in Barbara's book, like that makes me skeptical, like the two examples I just gave you, I realize that it challenges my own personal belief in abductions as a phenomenon. They challenge me because, after all, if I question the truth or validity of some of these claimed extraterrestrial encounters, which I do in some of these cases, then why wouldn't I extrapolate that out to all claimed ET encounters or all claimed abductions? Wouldn't it be possible for me to go further and state that all people who claim an abduction experience are basically just filling in the details of something that really didn't happen with a mental creation based on what their subconscious mind thinks those blank spots ought to look like? Our mind is very complex, after all. We still don't really understand most of our minds, of our brains. And this is especially so when you look at the descriptions of contact, not just over the last few decades, but over the many centuries. In other words, the nature of these contracts almost completely occurs within very well-defined cultural parameters that existed throughout the ages. And they tended to change over the long course of time as the cultures changed. So I'm going to just freely admit to you that recognizing this fact makes me a bit uncomfortable. Why? Well, to be perfectly honest about it, because I've spent over 20 years of my life as a believer in the reality of alien abduction. And the plain fact is, I don't want to have to admit that I may have held a wrong opinion on abductions for such a long period of time. And so, yes, I would find that there's an emotional resistance that I will have to those elements in the UFO research field that would lead me to change my opinion on whether it's abductions or other big picture things. Now, I should add here that I do believe in the reality of alien abduction. And I believe it because despite the large amounts of noise that are in that space, people talking about it, there are, in my view, enough very compelling cases that make me believe it's a real thing. And several of those made it into my latest book, The Alien Agendas. And a few of them came from people from this website, including a couple of accounts from Tracy. So, yes, I mean, I actually do believe that people are having encounters with non-human entities. So just so you understand that. But I also realize that getting to the deepest, truth on this matter is not as easy as just accepting every alleged contact story is genuine. Like, you're not going to, that to me is not really the way to do it. There are elements that I believe, and there are things that I personally have not found that I believe yet. So the discomfort that I experience when I'm studying the stories of some of Barbara's clients, it's not anything unusual. I think this is a universal feature of how we think. Like, we don't like to have to reinvent our basic understanding of reality. You know, it means that no matter where we happen to be on the spectrum of belief, whether if you're the most ardent skeptic of UFOs to the most credulous believer, that nearly all of us has an emotional commitment to the worldview that we have developed. And I'm not sure if I've ever really even found an exception to that rule, like ever. I don't know if I've ever met a person who didn't at least develop some emotional connection to, the ideas that they had about the world, how the world was put together and how it makes sense. Like, we develop an emotional attachment to these ideas of ours. And there are some people who are a bit more willing to change their views than others, but I don't think it's easy for anyone. And the reason is that, and this is another important point for me, I think, that each place along that spectrum of belief incorporates a fully fleshed out worldview. Like, if you are basically a UFO skeptic, let's say you are a UFO skeptic, that is part of a very complex, interconnected, and complete view of the world, where things are connected to each other. And if one big piece is taken out, it doesn't just leave a hole in that one area. It actually rips out connections that exist to a lot of other parts in your life. I went through this more than 25 years ago. I've talked about it many times. It was very difficult. That is when I first had to come to grips with the fact that I think I believe in UFOs. Like, that was actually a really difficult thing for me to come to. It was around 1994. I was about 32 years of age. I was a lot younger than I am now, but I was mature enough at that time where, I already had a great education. I was on a career path. I was a very serious young man, and I had really come into my own intellectually and in my personality. And, when you're 32, I mean, that's a lot younger than I am now, but you're still old enough to think you've got things figured out, and you really don't want to go through the business of reinventing your worldview at this point, especially when you're trying to impress other colleagues in your field. You want to have things figured out. And this is, I think, true with everyone. So we're not comfortable when we have to change our opinion on something that's fundamental to our worldview, because it really is, it's a mental, psychological crisis, and it goes the other way as well. I'll give you another, for instance, though, relating to myself, and why not? So when I was going back about 25 years again, so when I was still writing my first book, I had a different attitude about conspiracies than I do today. So back then, I was very much under the influence of my former academic life, because it had been pretty recent for me. And in that world, I can tell you, grand conspiracies just do not exist. That's that. No great conspiracies. In fact, I will tell you that I will never forget this. I was in an advanced seminar with a very distinguished professor, a man that I have always had tremendous respect for, a brilliant scholar, who I learned a lot from. And but he actually made this statement. He says, "No, grand conspiracies just can't happen." And he convinced me at the time. I was in my early mid-20s back then, and I believed it. The idea was it's impossible to have such a grand conspiracy to get people to coordinate, to act, and the whole argument. It seemed sound to me at that particular point in my life. Except when I started delving into the deep aspects of the UFO subject years later, I eventually developed another view. And this was very hard for me to do. It was mainly emotionally difficult, not intellectually difficult. Because I had to, at this point, when I was doing my book, it was a full decade later from that moment when I was sitting in that seminar, listening to this very distinguished professor persuade me that there were no grand conspiracies. And so it was hard. So the thing is, no one wants to learn that they have been wrong when looking at the world, because it's an admission that you've been deficient in your ability to understand things. And smart people especially do not like to learn that they have missed the boat on something important. It's very hard to get people to move along that dial once they have formulated a worldview. They formulate it and it stays. And it's not just with UFOs, it's with politics, it's with religion, it's with anything that has to do with understanding like the big picture of how the world is formulated. And of course, having to do with implied morality and right and wrong, which politics and religion both have a lot to do with. UFOs, maybe they could, but I don't think UFOs really are as relevant in terms of morality, but UFOs are relevant in terms of your idea of how the world is set up. And that's also a very important thing. So all of that is difficult for people to change their opinions on. And it becomes harder still once you take a stand publicly on the subject, like as I have done and a lot of you have done. Even if you haven't gone public in the greater world out there, you probably talk to family, you probably talk to friends, because when you do that, you've essentially painted yourself into a corner. So for me, I've been in this situation for so long, I think that I'm used to it, but I can definitely attest to the fact that once you make a public statement, you're always going to feel obligated to stand by it, because it's a weird thing. Like the ideas that you express publicly, and like they become part of you. They become part of you, and you are expected by all the other people to maintain those ideas, to stand by the things that you originally said. And, again, you don't have to be a public figure for this to be the case. If you've just given an opinion to your friends or family, it can work pretty much the same way. But of course, that can really be a trap, and it is a trap. So what it makes me think is how hard it is to get most people to change their minds about anything. Like, we know it's nearly impossible to do regarding politics. I mean, look at the world we're in. No one is changing their opinion. No one's changing their opinion about politics, or maybe very few people. Some people are, but it's hard for them when they do it, and they catch a lot of guff from their former political allies when they do it. So there's just tremendous pressure, social pressure, to not to change your opinion, because, your political beliefs bring you into certain cultural and social circles, and that's your life. And so people don't change their political opinions. It's really hard. Same with religion. Very much the same with religion. And it goes both ways with religion. So very religious people are strongly disinclined to throw that away and become agnostic or atheist or secular, because that's their whole community is religious, and that's where they're comfortable. And it would be equally difficult, equally impossible really, for secular and non-religious people suddenly to go into the religious community. I mean, the only thing that can do it is, I guess, is if they have a genuine spiritual moment and they just can't help it and they do it. But I mean, it's rare. We don't change our opinions on politics. We don't change our opinions on religion, and people don't easily change their opinions on UFOs or again, any of the other big picture issues. It's very difficult for them to do. Being able to convert people to our general way of thinking of UFOs, that is not easy. And when you find someone who can do it well, that's a nice thing. That is something that I'm actually able to do pretty well. I've noticed over the years. I've been one-on-one with thousands of individuals, and I've actually turned on many light bulbs over their heads. And of course, I get to do it with large groups, and I get to do it with my writings and my books. So I do feel like actually from my part of it, I've been, actually, when I think of it, it's one of the more successful things that I've done in my field in the UFO, in this journey, is actually being persuasive for the cause of the reality of UFOs. Yeah, actually, I don't think I've ever really considered that, but yes, that actually is something that I've done. I've been able to persuade, whether it's been on TV shows or documentaries or through YouTube or whatever. So that's a good thing. And I know many of you here on this site similarly are great at doing that in your circles. I think probably most of you are skilled at that to some extent, I suspect. But anyway, when we speak to other people about this subject of UFOs, like generally we're going to know where they are on the spectrum of belief. So it's always a good idea to speak to the person and not to where they are at, in other words. And, you don't give them all the information. Don't go into all the depth of the subject that you just happen to know is true. If you're going to try to sway a skeptic to our worldview, you've got to go with baby steps. You have to go with baby steps. Moving anyone along this path is difficult. When I wrote my very first book, Volume 1 of UFOs and the National Security State, it was in a very important way. It was a very conservative book. You go back and look at that book to this day, and people would joke about it. It's like, just the facts, ma'am. And that really was my goal. It was to be very ultra conservative. Didn't want to editorialize too much. I didn't want to get too snarky. I just wanted to be very low key, very factually based. And my hope was that I would reach more people of a skeptical point of view. I think that, that happened to some extent. I did reach some skeptics. And I was told this many times that, that my book, and there's a few other books that are like this. Leslie Kane's book on UFOs is one of these books as well. And there's others. And mine was one. But it's very difficult to get people to move along the path because of the emotional resistance. When people start to realize that their worldview that they've had is wrong. Like I remember so well about 25 years ago when I was first, in the early stages of realizing, wow, like this is real. I've said this many times because it's true. I would spend many nights staring at the ceiling, wide awake, unable to sleep, thinking through all of these if-then combinations. Like, well, if this is true, then what am I missing about critical parts of American history or world history? And, me, who even then, like, I prided myself on knowing that history really well. It occurred to me that I didn't really know a lot and that I was deluding myself. And it was very difficult for me to want to come to that opinion because I could have easily retreated into the comfortable academic security blanket and just said, oh, this is what's real and all that's just nonsense. Like, I could have done that. And at an emotional level in the immediate term, it would have been easier, way easier for me to do that. For whatever reason, and I don't fully know all the reasons why, but I just couldn't allow myself to do that, and I just had to keep like picking at the scab. It's really like I couldn't leave it alone, and so that I ended up doing, having the life that I've now had. But it's very difficult for us to move along that path because of the emotional and intellectual hole that it leaves when you discard an old belief that you've had for years and years. And it reminds me actually of a statement by the late John Mack in one of his books. I think it was his first book, Abduction, where he says this. But one of the great things about Mack was, his case studies are very interesting. that's quite valuable. But John Mack was another of these deep thinking people. And one thing that he said that always stuck with me was the process of personal growth, our process of personal growth, is basically synonymous with the process of shedding illusions about everything, about our world and about who we are. And he said, because we live in illusion, and the things that we believe to be true are illusory. And we only obtain growth through recognizing that many of the things that we believed are illusions, and we shed those, and it's like peeling away those layers, like the layers of an onion, to get more and more to the truth. And it was easier for me once I realized that's how it worked. So like I would rip away the first layer, which was, oh, wow, UFOs actually are real. Wow. But then I realized, well, there's more. And I rip away the next layer thinking, holy shit, there actually is some kind of worldwide conspiracy or cover-up that is involved in this. And then that's still not enough. And then you rip away more, and it's like, oh, wow, damn. Not only is there a cover-up, but there actually are like genuine beings who are not human beings, who like it's real and they're here. Like each stage along is like another ripping away of a layer. And that's moving another step along the spectrum of belief. And each one of those things is a challenge. Like, those of us here on this site, I mean, we're a relatively small community, but even with us, like there's a wide spectrum of belief in terms of UFOs. Forget the politics part, we know about that. But in terms of even what many of us believe in terms of UFOs, the fact is not everyone on this site believes the same thing. And that's the spectrum of belief. So I think in the end, we all have to decide not only what we believe, but how we believe it. That is why we believe it. To me, this is the most important thing of all. It's more important for me to have it clear as to, how and why I believe something than even what the content is. For me, it matters. In my view, it means coming to an understanding of what constitutes valid evidence. Or if you don't even want to go that far, you can say valid reasons to believe something. And I honestly don't know how much thought most people give to this question. In philosophy, it's called epistemology. This is basically the theory of knowledge. How do we know what we know? That is epistemology. And philosophers have been asking this probably since Socrates, who asked these exact kinds of questions. And it's always worth for each one of us to ask ourselves, what is it that I believe? Why do I believe it? What is the evidence? What is the foundation for this belief? Is it as strong as I think it is? What is the argument for the opposite held belief? I was just talking with the person who was shooting me for a documentary the other day. We were talking a little bit about this, and I can't remember, but I just pointed out my own personal philosophy, which is that any issue that comes up in, not just in the UFO field, but like the fringe field in general, whether it's ancient history or anything at all, I have always believed, this is my academic background, I suppose, but that it's incumbent to know what the conventional wisdom states on the matter. And not to turn it into a straw man either, but actually really to do justice to it and understand it. I think that's just important. It doesn't mean, I got a lot of pushback from him about this, and I was like, whoa. I mean, I fight the academic world on UFOs all the time. So, all right, so let's get that clear. But I also want to know what they think and how they think and why they think. Like, that's important to me. Because a lot of times they can be right. First of all, like, let's just give credit where it's due. On a lot of matters, the academic world is totally right about certain things about the state of the world. I'm not going to say that they're wrong about everything. I will say that they're wrong about a number of important things. Yes, they're not infallible, that's for sure. They make a lot of mistakes. But my point is simply, you want to know. You always want to know what the people who disagree with you think and why they disagree with you. And it's emotionally stressing. It can be like, no one wants to have their fundamental beliefs challenged, but it really is a good idea. And by the way, I haven't really gotten into politics with you guys since Biden got elected. But I will just say I continue to listen to liberal and conservative points of view and to read liberal and conservative points of view to a reasonable extent, when I get into the news. I still do that. And I don't always agree with one side or the other, but I read both sides and lots of other opinions because I just want to keep my finger on the pulse of what people believe and why they believe it. And in the UFO field, absolutely. It's very important. You want to know, what do the skeptics think about any given element of the UFO subject? Like, you want to know. Sometimes they're right. Like, that's the truth. And, for someone like myself, where, from time to time, I may have to say something publicly. The last thing anyone wants to do is look like a fool when you support a case where there's a very powerful skeptical argument that says otherwise. You want to know what the arguments are. Sometimes they're correct. And even when they're not correct, you want to know why they believe what they do. But when we examine our own beliefs in particular, we want to know why we believe what we do. Especially on a difficult subject like UFOs, we should always be asking ourselves, what constitutes good evidence? There's a lot that we just don't know. There's a lot of where we're guessing. There's a lot where I am guessing. So in general, when it comes to UFOs, I've always had a few guidelines that I just will always follow. The main thing for me is I always try to be very precise in how I draw conclusions. And I try not to automatically extrapolate from a set of given facts. In other words, I like to treat knowledge like a body. Bodies need bones, and those are the facts. I could look at the facts as like the bones of a body that we can rely on. Now, how do you know that a fact is reliable? Well, that can get tricky. How do we know anything? You can make yourself crazy with this. Voltaire actually once wrote that we know nothing about history. He said, just because some dead person wrote about an ancient battle in some old book doesn't mean anything. Now, when I read that, I don't know if Voltaire was actually being serious or if he was trolling. I don't know. But it is true that we're never going to have perfect omniscience with anything. Not with history, not with pretty much anything that I can think of. Certainly not with UFOs. But we can have practical knowledge of facts within reason. I think we can have a reasonable foundation from which to work. We all know the basics of how to do this. You check your sources. You find out where the information comes from. You ask yourself about the source, and you mainly examine the information. And you ask yourself if this can be reasonably demonstrated to be true. Can it be reasonably demonstrated to be false? If it can't be proven to be true or false, then we've got a problem there. We've got something that is literally unfalsifiable, which, as a philosopher would be happy to tell you, is it could be true, but it's technically not valid. It's not proper cricket to provide information that's not falsifiable. In other words, it can't possibly be proven true or false. So when someone says, well, I've got inside sources that tell me, et cetera, or, I lived on Mars for 20 years and then I came back, and you can't check the records because when I came back, I went back in time and my mom never knew I left the house. Like, when you get that story, like, you can't, how do you test that? Like, that's impossible. So those are unfalsifiable stories. I used to jokingly say, hey, look, we're actually all a piece of food on the plate of a giant and he's going to eat us. Prove me wrong. Like, you can't prove me wrong. Like, you could say, well, that's ridiculous, but I'll say, well, it's going to happen. He's going to eat us. And, maybe that could be falsifiable. Maybe there's a way to prove that's totally wrong. But I could, if I want to make a crazy little world of my own, I could just say, nope, and it would be very frustrating for you to argue against that. So that type of information I've never been fond of working with. There are unfalsifiable claims that some people have made that sometimes I will listen to. And that's always a judgment call. It's like, well, is this person reliable in my opinion? Well, okay, they seem like it. And like you're just kind of guessing at times. But if it fits other data that you have that you think is reliable, you can at least provisionally say, okay, maybe. But basically, you don't want to rely on anything like that ever. For me, I like to ask, can this source be checked in one way or another? So that's why I like government documents. I think they're good evidence of things, as long as you don't take them farther than you should. For example, when I read a government document from 1950 that talks about objects round in form being seen over the Hanford nuclear plant in the state of Washington back in 1950, and it tells me that anti-aircraft battalions have been alerted and that attempted interceptions have been made with negative results, which is what is said in this document, and other things, I can reasonably assume that that document is not a fake. I can because it's been checked out through the National Archives. It's existed in the public domain for almost 50 years now. There's no reasonable argument against the information that's in there. Now, does it mean that their interpretation of, or does it, let me put it this way, because they don't actually interpret those round objects. They just state that round objects have been there. But is it reasonable or not for me to infer that those are alien craft? Well, that's a whole different question. You might infer that or you might not infer that. You can go either way. So the data in the case of this document tells us certain things, but it doesn't tell us everything. And so you've got to be precise, and you want to be factually based when you deal with evidence, and don't go farther than the data allows you. When you do go further, at least know that you're going further. Know that you are speculating here. There's nothing wrong with speculating. It's perfectly legit. I do it all the time. I feel like you have to speculate frequently because we don't have all the information we have, and we do have a desire, most of us, I do, to have a picture. I want to know, what is the picture? That's why I wrote the Alien Agendas. I wanted to have a picture of what I think the situation is. And that's fair. It's totally fair to do that. You just tell people, this is what I think it looks like, and this is the evidence that I'm using. This is why I think this evidence is reasonable and why we can use it. It seems to me that we are allowed to make all sorts of inferences based on the knowledge we have, but we just have to remember that's all that they are. They're inferences. It's not the same as actual confirmed data. And, all of these things, I'm sure you already know. It seems to me that the less dogmatic we are about making conclusions, the easier it can be for us to keep our minds open and to continue to grow into new ideas and realities about our world. But it is always difficult. It's always difficult to get to a point where, again, going either way. Like for me, yes, I continue to believe in the reality of alien beings that, to possibly a great extent, but I don't know for sure, take human beings in the middle of the night and do things with them. I believe that happens. But I don't believe in every single instance in which it's claimed that happens. But if I were to change my opinion and suddenly deny that abductions happen, or state my opinion that I don't think they're happening, I could conceivably do it, but it would be a hard thing to do. I'm just being perfectly candid with you about it. Like emotionally, I wouldn't want to admit it. But reading Barbara's book earlier this week made me at least entertain the possibility to do I want to admit? Do I want to reevaluate what I think about abductions altogether? The fact is, I'm quite fascinated with stories of early contact between people and, whether it's aliens or ancient gods or mysterious people or whatever. And along the lines of that, I've read most of Albert Rosales' books on humanoid encounters. I think I've got a copy. I've got a lot of them on my Kindle, but I think I have one or two paperback versions around here. I can't find it at the moment. But anyway, they're fun reading. The thing is, I've never met Albert. I've never communicated with him. I've tried to reach him. I have not succeeded. And I'm glad he's written the books he's written. But I also have to say, like, he just believes every single thing. It makes me chuckle. Like, there's some stories in there that are just so, to my reading, so absurdly not true on the face of it. So many. And he just puts it in. Wow, okay. People were seeing all these mermaids in, off the coast of Scotland in the 1830s. Gee, that must be true. Well, I don't think that I believe in mermaids, but you can. And in other words, and you see these things going in trends, like certain types of things, whether it's sightings of Spring-Heeled Jack or mermaids or other types of beings. And of course, not taking into account, particularly in American journalism in the mid-19th century, how actually American journalism, in a lot of ways, got its start through fake stories and humor. One of those people went by the name of Mark Twain, and he was an early, he was out in Nevada in the 1860s. Far better decision than fighting in the Civil War, which he decided he didn't want any part of. So he goes out there, becomes a journalist, and he meets this crazy group of bohemian journalists who are essentially creating a new culture. That is the culture of American journalism. And they were just starting from scratch. And a lot of it was like they're trying to get eyeballs on the newspaper, and they, would make up stories or have a lot of tongue-in-cheek stories that were pretty clearly, obviously, and not true. And yet all these years later, when people go back and read these 19th century newspapers, like, they take everything at face value. And I'm just like, no. So anyway, with Albert's books, I'm glad he included all of the stuff that he included, but his criteria is where he is on the spectrum of belief is a very different place than where I am at in the spectrum of belief. That is for sure. But in any case, for all of us to change our opinions in either direction, it's not easy. It's not easy. And I really wonder, it's not impossible. It's not impossible. Like, we can do it. But I'm really starting to wonder, like, how much do people really change their opinions over the course of a life? Is it a lot? What do you think? Actually, I'm really curious what your thoughts on this are. I have noticed that from my own beliefs in the UFO field, they have absolutely gone through a gradual evolution over, several decades. So the things that I believe now are not exactly the things that I believed 20 years ago, although there's also a lot of consistency. I have to say honestly, there's a lot of consistency. So a lot of my ideas haven't really been transformed, but some have. Like, they've deepened. And I would say that I believe more things now. I've moved to, toward the side of belief on the spectrum much more than of disbelief. Yes, you know that I'm skeptical about a number of things, but I actually believe more things today than I probably did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But it's been a slow process, and every step along the way of believing something new has required some effort on my part. And I've always said that, the first breakthrough is the toughest. And it was true for me. So my first entry into the field of UFOs was the hardest one of all. Once I accepted UFOs as real and started filling in the gaps and the connections that were ripped out from my old understanding, it became easier for me to continually modify and develop that and to make new changes along the way. Another big moment was probably 9/11 for me, where that was early on as well. I was, a young UFO author, and then 9/11 happened, and that definitely forced a transformation of my worldview in quite a few ways. And I resisted that as well. For the whole first year after 9/11, I was not interested in entertaining conspiracy theories about it. Like I didn't think that they were worthwhile. I thought, that's just, out of control. Like it's such a wild thing to believe that this was an inside job. But then I started looking into those outlandish conspiracy theories, and I became persuaded by them. And I didn't want to be persuaded by them. I did not want that at all. I'm really winding this down here. I remember I've had quite a few conversations with, people in the academic community who learn about me, and I'll have a cup of coffee or I'll have a conversation with them. And like, I can always just see the intense skepticism that they have and their total unwillingness to want to consider that, hey, this guy just might be right about what he thinks. Like, I don't even hold it against them. It's part of the culture that they are in, and it's part of a mindset that you have for a long enough period of time that it really becomes very difficult to change, because you're changing a fundamental element of your worldview. You're not just changing your opinion on UFOs. That opinion on UFOs is tied to your beliefs about a lot of other things in the world. That's the whole reason. Like our beliefs are intertwined with each other. And when you take one out, you just can't excise that one thing and take it out like a tumor. It comes out and it rips out. It does damage to a lot of your other beliefs because they really are intertwined. That's the problem that we have with changing opinions. So, okay, I think I feel like I originally came in this with a somewhat of a clear idea, and I feel like I rambled a little bit, but there is a kind of coherent theme, which is how we believe, why we believe, the difficulty it is of changing our beliefs, how it is that our beliefs about UFOs are intertwined with our beliefs really about a lot of other things, which is what makes it difficult to move people along that spectrum of belief, whether you're at one extreme or the other extreme. So we typically will say, well, skeptics are really hidebound in their belief system. That's true, but so can we be. Those of us who strongly believe in the reality of UFOs, I just think it's a good idea every now and then to make ourselves a little bit uncomfortable and question our beliefs as well by encountering research or opinions that do not accord with our own. I think it's just a good thing for us to do, get us out of our comfort zone a little bit. So maybe that was why instinctively I wanted to read Barbara's book this week. It helps that I really like her and that I respect her. But I have a different perspective, as I've said many times, about this phenomena. At least I think that I do. But I respect her, and I wanted to know, like, why does she think that what the things that she does, and how does she go through her process? So I'm going to probably finish that book in the next few days. And all of this actually is for Volume 3 of National Security State. So, that includes recent abduction research, which hers is included, and that's part of the UFO story of the 1990s and 2000s. So, yeah, I want to know it. Okay, well, I hope this has been interesting. Hope you've enjoyed this. And look, I want to apologize to you for not having any fresh content for this entire week. I'm not going to let that happen again. So I do have things that I want to be sharing with you. I will share them. I promise you I will. Stay tuned. I will be back. In the meantime, I want to wish everyone a great day, great evening, wherever you are. Catch you real soon. Let's keep fighting the good fight. Bye for now.